Hello, everyone. My name is Matt, and you're listening to Old Gods and New Pagans, a show that takes a jump into topics for new pagans, animists, or anyone that just wants to build a stronger connection to nature and the old gods. Welcome to episode 3, and this week we're diving into the world of Norse paganism. Be sure to check the show notes for information that we talk about, including any notes I may take or relevant links, including a basic rough transcript of this episode. If you haven't subscribed, please do so to follow along with us from week to week. All right, let's get started. So, Norse paganism is a belief system that has its roots in pre-Christian belief systems of the Germanic people of Northern Europe, specifically in the areas that are now known as Scandinavia. I'll be sharing my knowledge and my personal perspective on this really fascinating belief system, including some of its origins, key beliefs, and practices. So, what does it mean to say Norse paganism? Well, Norse paganism, again, refers to the pre-Christian belief systems of the Germanic people of Northern Europe, specifically Scandinavia. The Norse people, often commonly known as Vikings, I won't get into the problems associated with that particular topic today, but that's how they're generally described. Because mostly that's because of the modern view, and that's really the view we know of the Norse people or the Viking culture, where they started expanding out and started exploring other areas, other countries. Well, they spread through Germania up into the Scandinavian countries and kind of brought their belief systems with them as they explored and settled the other parts of Europe and even beyond. So those beliefs and practices kind of evolved. So you may hear the term Germanic paganism, Celtic paganism, Norse paganism, etc. A lot of those kind of had the same roots as the people migrated north and west. But then things changed as really the cultures evolved as well. Basic belief structure of Norse paganism is animist based, meaning that they believe that everything in nature has some sort of a spirit or consciousness. This goes to include people, the gods, animals, plants, and even inanimate objects like rocks, mountains, rivers, things like that. So the basic belief structure, again, is centered around the worship of the gods and the goddesses of the Norse pantheon. These represent different aspects of nature, human nature, civilization, and community. These gods and goddesses are divided into three main pantheons: the Jotun, the Aesir, and the Vanir. This also kind of includes dwarves, elves, and other entities like the Disir. I'll go into the specifics of this pantheons in a little bit. First, I want to kind of tell a little bit of the creation story. This is the myth of how the Jotun, the Aesir, humans, the world kind of came into being. So the Norse creation story, as it's told in the ancient sagas and myths, is a tale of how the world and all its inhabitants came to be. This will not be a detailed account. I may do an episode on that in the future where I go into a lot more in depth of the creation stories and tell all the side stories that kind of go along with that. But it's a story of struggle and triumph. It's kind of a fire and ice saga, and ultimately the triumph of order over chaos. The story begins in the void, known as Ginnungagap. In the vast emptiness, two primal forces lay dormant: force of fire and the force of ice. On one side of Ginnungagap, the fire of Muspelheim blazed, while the other, the glaciers of Niflheim, stretched endlessly. As the two forces met in the void, the ice began to melt, and the two forces began to mix and clash, creating sparks that would eventually form into Ymir, the first of the giants. Ymir, being the first giant, was the father of all giants and the gods. While he slept, and as the frost continued to melt, a cow, Audhumla, and please forgive me for my pronunciations in some of this, emerged from it. She nourished Ymir with her milk, and she in turn was nourished by the salt and the ice. Her licking slowly uncovered Buri, the first of the Aesir tribe of gods. Buri had a son, Bor, who married Besla, the daughter of the giant Bolthorn. The half-god, half-giant children of Bor and Besla were Odin, who became the chief of the Aesir gods, and his two brothers, Vili and Ve. Eventually the Aesir gods, led by Odin, killed Ymir and created the world Midgard from his body. His blood formed the oceans and the rivers. His bones formed the mountains, and from his skull the sky was formed, and from his brain the clouds. Odin then, with his brothers, created the first humans, Ask and Embla, from two trunks that had washed ashore. The Aesir gods then built Asgard, their home in the heavens, and Midgard, the world of humans, on the body of Ymir. They also created the 9 realms and appointed the dwarves to be the craftsmen of the gods, and assigned the other realms for entities like the elves. With the creation of the world and the Aesir gods, the giants and the gods were in an eternal struggle for power and dominance. But ultimately, the Aesir gods were able to maintain order and balance in the world, ensuring that it would be a place of beauty, wonder, and prosperity for all its inhabitants. So that was the creation myth for the Norse pantheon. I really like the idea of that, the kind of the triumph of order over chaos, the fire and ice. Really, I know it's quite poetic. And that's the thing with a lot of the sources we have for the Norse gods and the Norse paganism pantheon and stuff comes from the culture that told stories a lot in poem, and they embellished and they told these stories in such a way that they were very interesting because it was an oral culture. That a lot of these stories were passed down in the most interesting way possible. One, I would imagine, just so it could be memorized a lot better. So let's get into the pantheons of gods. First pantheon that we know of, kind of where it all started, were the Jotun, or the giants. Who are believed to have existed before the other gods and goddesses, and they're kind of the source of the Norse pantheon. They are associated with natural elements such as the earth, mountains, and winter. Notable members of the Jotun pantheon include Jord, the personification of earth, which is like the Norse version of Mother Earth, is Jord. And where we get the term, like our backyard, we take care of our yard, kind of came from. Also, Skadi, the goddess of mountains and winter, and Angrboda, the maid of Loki and the mother of Fenrir, Jormungandr, and Hel, the goddess of the dead. The Aesir pantheon is made up of gods of war and power and community and civilization, such as Odin, also known as the Allfather, and is associated with wisdom, war, and death. Thor, associated with thunder, the sky, strength, and agriculture. And there's also Baldur, who's associated with light, wisdom, and courage. These are considered the more powerful gods in the pantheon, and there are others as well. Then we have the Vanir pantheon, which is made up of gods of nature and fertility, such as Njord, who is associated with wind, sea, and its riches. Freyr, who is associated with fertility, harvest, prosperity, and peace, and is also known for his association with virility and sexuality. Funny, he's also commonly called the god of the erection, mainly because most of his totems, statues, and everything that's done in his honor are show him with an erection, which is kind of putting into the idea of the fertility, sexuality, and virility that he's associated with. And we also have his sister Freya, who's associated with fertility as well. But whereas Freyr is associated with the seed of fertility, Freya is associated with the womb of fertility. She's also the goddess of beauty, war, strategy, and magic. She is often considered the mother of Seidh magic, and she is the leader of the Valkyrie, female warriors who fly into battle and choose who will live and die. Some of the Norse paganism practices include certain practices like rituals, ceremonies, and different offerings to the gods and goddesses. And this will go into more detail in a future podcast. But these practices were performed to honor the gods, gain their favor, and also as well as just thank them for their blessings and protection. A lot of these practices were done during seasonal things, such as harvesting, planting, time to travel. So it'd be like raiding times or times to make war, because a lot of these cultures, these people would not make war in the wintertime. So during the summer, they would use this time to, they would say, have like a big bloat or like a sacrificial feast offering, to start off these times. Some of these practices were different types of sacrifices, bloats, as I mentioned before, and sumbel, kind of another ritual ceremony. Additionally, the use of runes. My dog is under my desk wanting to mess with me right now. Some of these practices included the bloats, the sumbel, and different sacrifices. And again, these were done more on a seasonal basis. That wasn't something that was done daily. But it was, again, like before a farmer would plant, he may provide an offering to Thor or Sif in that way. A family wanting to conceive a child would probably provide an offering to Freya or Freyr. And then also the use of runes as a form of divination or spell work was also an aspect of Norse paganism. There's very little we know about this, but there are some sources that do claim that, particularly the Havamal, where Odin sacrificed himself on the tree for 9 days, the tree Yggdrasil, and in some of those texts he talked about the magic and power of the runes. Some of the things that specifically about Norse paganism that make it different, most pagan practices are similar across the world, and most have an emphasis on animism, and Norse paganism is no different from that. And that's just, again, believing that everything in nature kind of has a spirit or a level of consciousness. Norse pagans also believed in ancestor worship because of their belief in reincarnation. This kind of came as a veneration of ancestors, mainly because they believed that your ancestors would be reincarnated into grandchildren, great-grandchildren, etc. So they, kind of worshipped and honored their ancestors who came before them, and the knowledge and everything that they provided coming down. And additionally, the pantheon of gods and goddesses in Norse paganism is a little bit unique and complex, just because there's multiple pantheons of gods that were considered different tribes. You don't get that with other pagan belief systems. And, they have in different aspects of nature, human nature, civilization, and community. There's also an emphasis on the warrior culture that was common in the North, and the both fear and respect for things like mountains, snow, and ice, just because that was a big aspect of their civilization and their culture. And so that kind of had a big part into the belief systems. So you may ask, is there some kind of a Bible or other source materials for Norse paganism? And the truth is there is no Bible. Paganism really is just a collection of culture and practices and really customs that were passed down. So the primary source of materials for Norse paganism are in the Norse sagas and Eddas. from the Scandinavian countries, Iceland, etc. And it's just kind of a collection of stories, myths, poems that were passed down orally for generations before eventually being written down by travelers who came up to those areas and wanted to document what they found, what they heard, what they saw. And so these texts provide insight into the beliefs, the values, and the practices of the Norse people, and are considered to be the most comprehensive source of information about Norse paganism. Additionally, like archaeological evidence, such as different artifacts, inscriptions, rune stones, also provide some information about the belief system. So, in conclusion, Norse paganism is a fascinating and rich belief system, has roots in the pre-Christian belief systems of the Germanic people of Northern Europe and into the Scandinavian countries. It is animist in nature, with a pantheon of gods and goddesses, with multiple pantheons of gods and goddesses, representing different aspects of nature, human nature, civilization, community. And these practices and rituals were performed, usually in honor to gain the favor of the gods and goddesses, thank them for their blessings and protection, and to just pass down different customs and cultures to generations. A lot of these beliefs and practices were not simply spiritual, as if they were also to teach life lessons on how to work with other people, how to get along with other people, practices to how to treat travelers or how to treat a host or a guest in your home. So a lot of these practices and stuff kind of go beyond the spirituality and get into the community aspect of it all. I hope this episode has helped provide a deeper understanding and appreciation for Norse paganism. If you're interested in following Norse paganism or interested in more information about it, I highly encourage you to join our community, Old Gods, New Pagans. We have a small group in there, but these are really respectful, good people who follow not only Norse paganism, but Celtic paganism, Wicca, and a few other pagan paths. We do not discriminate against any other paths. We try to set a foundation of what paganism is and give you the tools and allow you to find your own path as you see fit. I thank you all for listening. If you haven't subscribed to this show, please do so. More episodes will be coming. We'll be diving into more about Norse paganism, specifically going into the specifics of the different gods, goddesses, and creation myths and stories. But we're also going to start branching out into other pagan paths, such as Celtic paganism, Slavic paganism, Semitic paganism, which was the origin for a lot of your Abrahamic faiths, as well as even going into some Native American or African Asian belief systems. So again, thank you for listening. If you have any questions, definitely reach out to us. And yeah.